Thank you for joining us today. Hopping on. Appreciate you taking the time, and obviously we're going to make this recording available afterwards as well to share with anybody that wasn't able to join us live. So my name is Jesse Hill. I'm the president of Tier 3 IT Solutions, and I'm joined by Tin Mar, our sales operations analyst today, who's helped put a lot of this together. And the topic that we wanted to talk about today is something that we thought was really relevant and important to businesses in the Edmonton area. And specifically, if you're here today, it's because likely you are involved in the construction industry of some way. The examples that we're going to be going through are not specific to construction, but we believe that a lot of the information that we're going to provide has parallels to your industry. So if for those of you who maybe are here live, we do want to make sure that we hear back from you. So participation we're looking for is just, first of all, listen, learn, participate. If you have any questions or comments, you can throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll do our best to adjust or to adapt and answer and support you in answering those. And we will send out a survey afterwards if you wouldn't mind sharing any feedback that you have. And over our series here, we do have a draw that we'll be doing for the participants that do that at a later date. Today's webinar isn't about us, but I just want to share really quickly a couple of things that we believe. So first of all, we believe that technology and the investments that you make should be helping you achieve your business goals, overcoming business challenges, and that your technology strategy that you're using and implementing is unique to your business and expectations. And then finally at the bottom here, the last bit about us, this is what we call our brand commitment. I'm not going to run through it all, but it essentially talks about what we believe makes Tier 3 IT special and unique and valuable in the relationships that we have with our clients. And I'd be happy to connect and talk with any of you about that more if you have any questions. So the agenda that we're going to run through today, first, we're going to give a bit of a story and an overview of an incident that we were called in to help investigate and remediate on behalf of a business here in the province. We're going to talk a little bit about how cyber criminals are taking advantage of users. The reality is that most cyber incidents begin with a user error or vulnerability. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, that external risk and the, attack surface and the technical side of this particular incident. So here's the story that kind of got a lot of this going. We received a call to come in and help an automotive dealership. Based in Alberta, they've got a couple of brands, couple of locations, and basically that we heard that they were running Microsoft 365 and they needed help figuring out what was going on in their 365 tenant. It was the insurance company that was driving this investigation and had reached out to us to come in and take a look. What we knew going in was that there was an unauthorized wire transfer. The automotive dealership had, unwittingly sent money somewhere that they shouldn't. And when we get called in a situation like this, there's a lot of different, pieces in play. Yes, we want to secure their environment to stop, the risk from, spreading further, but we also want to understand how this happened. And that's what the insurance company in particular wanted to know at the beginning. Ultimately, what we discovered was that one of their users had a cyber criminal had access to their mailbox. That person was able to see their Outlook just like the regular employee. They could read, send, set up rules and act on behalf of that user and control that mailbox. From having that access and being able to read everything, they were able to create a very targeted, highly credible fund transfer request. It matched the dates, names, invoice numbers, vehicle descriptions, amounts, down to the penny. And with this information, they were able to essentially convince the dealership that while the money needed to be sent to bank account A, it really should go to bank account B, which is the one that was controlled by the cyber criminals. And unfortunately, they didn't discover it in time to freeze, reverse, or recover the funds. It ultimately, we don't know the specific details of the transaction, but we understand that it resulted in nearly $200,000, lost in the transaction. So you can imagine as you look at this, sequence of events, there's multiple, problems from the business's perspective that we're going to talk about, both technical and non-technical. But from the cyber criminals perspective, there's lots of opportunities. And that's one of the things we talk about often in the cybersecurity space is that the cyber criminals only need to be right once. They only need to find one vulnerability to get in the door and execute an attack like this. The business and the IT team, they need to be right all day, every day in multiple places in order to avoid these types of incidents. So as we were preparing for this, I mean, obviously we saw, the impact on this particular business, but we wanted to understand, by and large, how big is this problem? So we are a partner, a strategic partner with Coalition. They are one of the world's leading active insurance providers. And one of the things I really appreciate about working with them is that they allow us to see aggregate information about claims that have been submitted against the policies that they write. So we took the profile of this particular company, we dropped it into their tool, and this is what it came back. So we see that there's in the type of loss column, really the three types of loss are ransomware, which is your data being encrypted and held hostage. The fund transfers fraud, which is essentially what we just talked about, that scenario of sending money somewhere that it shouldn't have gone. And then a data breach, which is somebody, exploiting a vulnerability to enter the network and exfiltrate data. And, if you think about stealing, intellectual property or, payment information or private information, that's what the data breach would be. Now, the thing about these is that it's when somebody suffers an attack, it's not always one or the other. So the top line, the composite, is just the collection of all of the types of claims that come in. So when we look at the columns, we can see the median, meaning on the fund transfers fraud, the median is that half of the claims are less than 93,000 and half are more than 93,000. And so in this particular case with the auto dealer, of course, their claim, their loss was higher than the median. Not quite as high as the once in 10 year scenario, and obviously not up at the 1 in 100 years. However, the money that left the bank account is only one part of the loss. There's intangible losses that come into play after the fact as well. They've had to work with lawyers and accountants They may have, cause problems in a vendor relationship or client relationship. And so the $200,000 loss might be a total loss of 300 or 400 or 600,000, depending how those things play out. So we always look in any type of incident scenario, what did we learn? And so what we went back to them with was we wanted to show them what we perceived as the technical risks that potentially led to this. The first was this particular organization had chosen to not enable multi-factor authentication on their Microsoft 365 accounts. And this, unfortunately, is more common than it should be. Businesses perceive increasing the security as an obstacle to access for their people. And that's essentially what they had here. So by not enabling multi-factor authentication, the cyber criminals were able to get into that account much more easily. They didn't have a way to monitor for when somebody new accessed an account. So as an example, when you look at the activity logs, and we see that a person is consistently logging in Edmonton, 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 New York, or Tel Aviv, or you know, Edinburgh. Well, there should be an alert that lets us know it's a new device in a new location. Make sure it's a legitimate login. And then one of the things I think in this case that was probably a little bit unique was they had really poor account management hygiene. And what I mean by this is, when we were investigating and understanding exactly what had transpired, we were asking them about user accounts, and we discovered that they had probably about 30% of the accounts that were active and licensed and enabled in their Microsoft 365 account were for people that don't work there anymore. And so they weren't appropriately communicating when somebody left the organization and closing those accounts. So imagine it's kind of just like when somebody, quits and has their last day at work, but they don't have to turn in any of their keys to the building. Well, they still have access to all of that. The second part that we saw were, what we would consider the insider risks. So we are unable to say, for sure how the cyber criminal ultimately gained access to the account. However, it's pretty safe to say that the user fell for a phishing attack. The reason I say that is that the attacker had this user's username and password. They may have acquired it through, a dark web scrape of data, but more likely than not, this user received a phishing attack at some point, fell for it, entered their username and password, and gave it away. The other thing that we noted was that when they received instructions to send a wire transfer to an unfamiliar account, there weren't any verifications or internal accounting controls around making sure that the money that they're sending is going to the proper location. So this is obviously a non-technical finding, but something that every business should consider. And then unfortunately, at the end of the day, and the reason this turned into a significant loss was they discovered through this process that they didn't have the appropriate insurance coverage. And this is something that I would encourage any business owner to meet with their broker on a regular basis, talk about what's available, understand, your exposure, your positions, and make sure you have the appropriate insurance. So the insurance company investigated so that they could understand the source of the loss, and then ultimately denied the claim on the actual fund transfer loss itself. So, what do we see as threats in construction? We talked about the losses that coalition sees. Ransomware without proper controls and protections in place. Just think to yourself in your construction business, what would life look like if all of your important information was encrypted and held hostage by a cyber criminal? We just talked about how phishing scams are, commonplace, and particularly in construction where there's typically a lot of wire transfers happening, large dollar amounts, and very visible kind of information about who's working on a particular site and the scope of the work that they're doing. Those types of attacks are more common. And then supply chain vulnerabilities. And this is probably one of the most difficult aspects for us as, business owners and operators to assess and manage. But, you know, consider this. If you have your cybersecurity under control and everything is fine on your end, but one of your vendors or one of your customers experiences a cyber incident where their system is compromised. This whole scenario that we talked about where the attack was designed in such a targeted way because they had access to the invoice and the client information and the amounts. Well, that exists on both ends of an email. So even when you're getting, inquiries from your clients and your vendors, you might look at all of the things that we tell you in an email to make sure that it came from the correct domain and that all the spelling is good and the numbers match up and the information is correct. But if you get a request that says, "Oh, we want you to send the wire transfer to this account instead of the old one," you really need to have a process to verify that through an alternate means. So don't just reply to that email and ask, are you sure about that? And then, of course, in construction, the impacts of a cyber incident, we've already talked about how it can result in, a financial loss. The downtime is one of the big ones that, we hear about. I was meeting with a client this morning and, or we asked them and they said it would be chaos if we didn't have access to computers for, an extended period of time. And then the reputational damage. And this is again one of those areas that we're starting to see where in Canada, we don't have really, really strong cybersecurity regulations that the government is imposing. And so instead, what we're starting to see is that large providers, are asking their vendors to attest that they have certain cybersecurity controls in place. The reason I bring this up under reputational damage is that in the future, you may find that it's more difficult to win an RFP and be awarded a contract if you can't prove that you have your cybersecurity under control. And if you experience a cyber incident, then it makes it that much harder to maintain those relationships and build new ones in the future. So, what do you do now? The first thing is educate your staff. Cyber awareness training needs to be mandatory for everybody. And the reason we specified in here, especially C-level and top management, is that they are the high value targets, the high risk people within your business. And unfortunately, sometimes they feel like they are above the need to do, you know, ongoing weekly cybersecurity awareness training. We would encourage you that your C-level and top management should be leading the education and awareness around cyber risk. You've got to run some assessments, understand what you have, how it's configured, what your exposure looks like, how does this affect other areas of your business, What kinds of, response plans do you have in place? And start asking some of these questions, not just around your business and your team, but around your vendors and your partners as well. And then create an action plan. What can you improve, when, and by how much? So we often, there's a couple of phrases that we talk about with our clients. The first one is that cybersecurity is not a product you install, it's a practice you instill, meaning you cannot make a payment to make cybersecurity happen. Yes, you will buy products, you will buy solutions, you will invest in training, you will do all of these things, but it you can't buy it. You have to buy into it. The second one is that cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. And the premise around that one is, of course, that we could we could set your network and your systems up to be as secure as possible. And then when we all go to bed tonight, when we wake up tomorrow, there are new vulnerabilities, new patches that need to be deployed. There's new threats that, we may or may not be aware of, that cyber criminals may or may not be exploiting quite yet. So you just need to be making a plan and improving week after week, year after year, to be more secure than your peers. Once you've done that, start over at step number one. Again, it is a process that you need to continuously review and revise. So, how can we help? So, for those of you who are interested in learning more about where you stand in terms of your current network, your configuration, your risk, your exposure. We do have a special security assessment and review package here for you. And so, as you can see, it's a discounted price for webinar attendees. And we'll run a couple of security assessments against your network, both from outside your network and within it. We will generate the reports, we'll review them with you. And then for your staff, we're able to offer 60 days of cybersecurity awareness training access for them so that they can educate themselves a little bit and you can feel a little bit better that you've closed the gap a little bit. And then of course for businesses that are clients of ours, this is a big part of what we do on an ongoing basis, proactively managing their systems to reduce risk and improve efficiency. And as we mentioned, help you achieve business goals and solve business challenges. All right. So thank you again for joining. Really appreciate it. We actually got through the content here pretty quick, and that was by design. We wanted to make sure we had some time for questions. We have some prepared already, but also want to just check and see if there's anything that's come in from the attendees here now. Yeah, so Tim's commenting. Again, we knew that we had heard from a couple of the people that they weren't going to be able to attend live, and that's fine. So we wanted to just talk really quick. Again, feel free to post them in there. We'll just talk about the questions that come up regularly as we're meeting with businesses. So the first one, how often does this kind of thing happen? And the answer is that it's a little difficult to say, but you can search online, you can check RCMP reports in particular, and you'll see very clearly that these types of attacks have been on the rise for years and are accelerating. They're accelerating both in terms of the frequency and in terms of the amount of loss. These cyber criminals are getting smarter. They're starting to figure out how to be incredibly targeted, get the most money out of a business, and make it as difficult as possible for them to recover. So how often does it happen? Every single day, there are businesses that are dealing with this kind of situation. Do they target certain kinds or sizes of businesses? You know, the truth is that cyber criminals know that smaller, less mature businesses actually are easier targets. So if you have fewer than 500 staff and you don't have a dedicated cybersecurity team and specialists and those types of things, you are at higher risk than, a very large operation like that. How do I tell if an email is a phishing attack? Well, this is always one of those things that is challenging and tricky. The first thing I would suggest to you, slow down. Really, if you just take a step back and reassess um, the email, it'll give you a pretty good indication. We've got a couple blogs about this. One of the methods is called the SLAM method, so SLAM. So if S is for sender. So first you want to confirm that the person who sent you the email is the person you expect them to be and that it came from where you expect it to come from, meaning that I can mask an email address to say, anything that I want, but when you hit reply, it will reply to the account that was set as reply to. You also want to check the spelling, make sure that, an I hasn't been replaced with an L, these types of things. So the L is for links. Most phishing attacks are trying to get you to click on a link. And it could be, the classic is something like, oh, your Netflix account has expired. Click here to update your payment information. Or maybe someone has sent you an RFP, a request for proposal, and they want you to click on a link. Or the A is for attachments. Now, in attachments, you might get an RFP and it's a PDF, and in the PDF, it's just a link that says, click here to access. Again, it's just another way of obfuscating the link and making it harder to detect by, spam filters and those types of things. The other thing we want to look for in the attachments are things with unusual attachments like executables, HTMLs, JavaScripts, and those types of things. Generally speaking, if you weren't expecting it and you don't recognize it, you don't want to run it. And then M is for message. So in message, we're looking for proper spelling, grammar, is this how this person normally, communicates in tone and those types of things. What should I do if I think I've clicked on one? Immediately notify your IT team, your IT department, your cybersecurity professional, and start investigating to understand, what is the potential scope of this. We talk all the time about passwords, good password hygiene. If you reuse the same password across dozens of web pages, which is a big cybersecurity no-no, you need to go and you need to change that anywhere that you use that password. If you have, multi-factor authentication, you might want to double check that it's enabled and enforced and those types of things. But as quickly as possible, you want to communicate with your IT and your management to let them know. How do I tell if someone's in my email account already? So this is kind of an interesting question because in the scenario that we gave, we mentioned that the attacker was living on the land. They were in that email address, in that email account. So there are little signs, right? Maybe when you pop open your Outlook in the morning, there's an email that's marked as read that you haven't actually read yet, right? Because what a lot of times the cyber criminals will do is they will wait until, you know, the middle of the night to log in and look at your email to see what's happened so that they're not making things change status while you're in there. So if they don't put something back to unread that you've already read, you might notice that there are messages that have been sent that you don't remember sending. You might notice that there are new message rules where they've configured it so that if an email comes in from a certain person, it goes to a certain, folder or account or, something like that. And then how do I kick them out? Again, in most cases, you're going to want to talk to your IT team, because kicking them out is just one part. We have a whole list of things we need to do to verify that their account has been um, terminated. What kind of insurance should I have to protect myself from this kind of loss? So first of all, we are not insurance brokers or advisors, and we're not qualified to, comment or sell insurance. So the first thing I would say is you really should talk to your insurance broker. Now, your insurance broker, I hope they have a relationship with an IT company like ourselves, as we do with many insurers, to help them, not just complete a questionnaire, but assess the risk. What I will say is that there are different kinds of cyber insurance. There's cyber liability insurance and cyber crime insurance. And they're two different things. They have two different coverage limits and premium structures and all those types of things. And if I'm not mistaken, in this case, I believe the cyber crime coverage was what this particular client was missing. And so that's what resulted in their loss. All right. So this is everything that we had prepared. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're happy to stick around for a couple minutes if you have any other questions or comments. You can reach us, as you see, through social media, through our website, through email. And I hope this was a good use of your time. Thanks for joining, and hopefully we chat soon. Have a great day.